Hello and thank you for tuning in to Tacoma's Eldercare channel. I'm the host of the channel for you today, and my name is Bob Michaels. I'm with a law firm of Smith Alling located here in downtown Tacoma. I'm also an elder law lawyer who's been practicing for 30 years. And in my travels, I've had the good opportunity and great fun to run into Christopher Kimball from Christopher V. Kimball Financial
Services. You got it.
In Lakewood, Washington. Chris has generously agreed to come in and speak with us today about a couple of interesting topics. But the first one but before we get to that, I'm sorry for fumbling here, but before we get to that, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people how to get a hold of you.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate being here. My name is Chris Kimball. I've been a certified financial planner practitioner for over 20 years, in my 22nd year, as a matter of fact. Almost up there with Bob, but not quite. And enjoy what I do. I've developed great relationships with my clients. Looking for a few good clients every year, not looking to grow dramatically quickly, but what I offer is certified financial planner practitioner offerings such as fee-based plans, entire financial plans for a set fee, hourly work if someone wants to come in and just talk to me on an hourly basis. I work with couples who are divorcing to help analyze and equitably divide the assets that they have. In fact, I've taken the collaborative law training to facilitate that part of my business. Asset management is a huge part of my business, as well as working on 401k plans and some insurance-based products as well.
Super. And Chris helps us present and does a very nice job in our workshops that we do here in the community, and always has some great informative presentations, one of which that you presented at one of our recent workshops that I wanted you to share today. And that involves this concept of managing money, whether it's the parents or grandparents, and them having a finite amount of money. Maybe their earning years are over. And guess what? Kids or grandkids see that opportunity to perhaps get an interest-free, no payback,
a forgivable loan.
Why don't you talk to us about that and why that's an issue, particularly with the seniors that we see?
Well, the problem first came to my attention with an actual client of mine. It was a gentleman who retired, worked at a firm for 35, 40 years, never made a lot of money in his life, but he had $250,000 when he retired. Now that may not sound like a huge amount of money when you're talking about funding retirement, but this guy's expenses weren't that high. And his money, when I sat down and planned it out and took a look at it, probably would have lasted him the rest of his life just fine, barring some unexpected long-term care expense, which, as we know, is financially devastating. But assuming he stayed healthy, it would have worked fine. I took half the money, put it in something very conservative, took the other half, put it in something more aggressive. We planned it all out, we had it set, we had the plan, he's off and running. And then his grandson moved in with him. Now, normally that wouldn't be a problem. Grandfather, grandson, you could make a movie out of it. But the grandson had other ideas of what to do with this gentleman's money. Particularly, he wanted to start a business. Now, the gentleman called me and said, my grandson wants to start this business, got high hopes for it, it's going to make a lot of money, it's going to be just great. Now, I think we all know that most startup businesses do not last very long. In fact, in the restaurant business, I think in a 4-year period of time, the failure rate is like 92%. So I cautioned this gentleman. I said, look, that's about a third of your portfolio. That's a lot of money to put at risk. I don't really think this is something I would advise you to do. And I said, besides, if your grandson doesn't have enough money to support himself, if you give him all your money and he blows it all, how is he then going to support himself and you? Well, long story short, he didn't listen to me, and $80,000 disappeared. Now he's down to slim pickings in terms of annual income based on his investments. Well, grandson wasn't satisfied with the business venture, which failed. Grandson decided he needed new transportation. Another 15 or 20,000 came out. And this pattern repeated itself. I think it was over a period of maybe 4 or 5 years is all. And I'll never forget the day this guy came into my office to liquidate the last few dollars that was in his last account. And I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm working part-time now, and I'll probably have to keep working part-time till the day I die. And he had some health problems, so he wasn't like in the best shape. I just felt awful, and yet every piece of advice I'd given him, he had ignored. So if you're listening to this and you're a parent or grandparent, let me put this as bluntly as I can. Don't give money to your kids unless you have a financial plan that supports it. I am all for giving money to kids. I think you can design wills in such a way that you can have the kids have to work a little to get it. You can protect them from themselves. A good will and good estate planning is critical. Get that in place. Then decide whether or not you can afford to give your money to your kids or grandkids. Another example, a client of mine, he received a huge amount of money from a lawsuit. He'd never made more than $30,000 in his life either. He was a person that was just salt of the earth, hardworking, lower middle class. But he suddenly has $3 million, comes in. By the way, the house is paid for too, and $6,000 a month of income every month for the rest of his life. So he comes in and says, what do we do with the money? And I said, let's structure it in such a way that you can get to some of it easily, some of it's longer term growth, so on and so on. All of a sudden, all kinds of relatives started coming out of the woodwork. People we'd never heard of, but they're related and they needed money. This was a lawsuit, so I think it was public knowledge or public domain or something, because everybody seemed to know about it. And I started getting phone calls for $40,000, $50,000 distributions. Now, from a $3 million nest egg, $50,000 is not that much, unless it's every month. Then it gets a little bit troublesome, especially if you have things invested conservatively. This poor man was just caving to every relative that called him. And I finally, at about $1.3 million or $1.4 million, when that's all that was left, I desperately talked to the person that referred the client to me, and I said, look, you referred this client in good faith. I've done everything I can, but here's what's going on. What do we do? And the person who referred the client to me said, is there any way you can lock up some of that money and something they can't touch very easily? So I said, yeah, I could try. So I tried to put some of the money in a separate account that wouldn't be quite as visible to this person. I mean, he knew it was there, but he had to make a few phone calls before he could actually get his hands on it. And that seems to have slowed the flow down a little bit. But bottom line is now there's about, less than $1 million left out of $3 million. And it's been maybe 7, 8 years. And this person's not that old. So again, the warning is, if you get a large chunk of money, even though you may think you're never going to spend it all, believe me, you can. Look at sports stars, football players that make millions and end up broke at 50. It can happen. So please, talk to an estate planning attorney, someone really qualified, like Bob, for example. Get a will done, put some trust together, get an assessment of where you stand, do a financial plan with me, with somebody who's qualified, and then decide what makes sense from charity, kids, other opportunities to give. Because giving is fantastic, and I highly recommend you do it, but give responsibly.
And there's also the element that comes into this where if you have a freely, knowingly consenting adult agreeing to give money to their children or relatives is one thing, but what we find is, particularly in the aged population, as their mental faculties deteriorate, a portion of their thinking, critical thinking, passes from them, and they simply can't say no, or they're not reasonably in tune with what's really happening. So they will just, rather than create conflict, will go ahead and give out the money and so forth. With those types of clients, we work hard towards making sure that there are appropriate attorney and facts assigned with them. We work with people like Chris to perhaps place limits on various accounts, so if they are prone to spending money or giving away, that they, like I said, have to, they can only go so far without having to move mountains. But that is a real problem that we see, particularly with the aged. And falls into another category of undue influence, and some children, some grandchildren, some nieces and nephews become very adept at manipulating grandma and grandpa or even aged parents, and much to the chagrin of the rest of the family. So those of you listening, if you have a loved one who might be perceived or might be being taken advantage of, come in and see us, come and see Chris, and let's get the safeguards in place. It doesn't mean that they can't accomplish their goals of helping people and doing certain things. It just means that it's done knowingly and voluntarily and after a full understanding of what they're doing. Well, Chris, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
And again, how can we get a hold of you?
Best way is to either go online to chrisvkimball.com, or you can call my office at 253-722-PLAN. That's 253-722-7526. Or if you're out of the area, 866-ON-A-PLAN. And I'd love to talk to you. As I mentioned, the first meeting is always complimentary.
Super. And I also, I know you have a radio program because I've been on it.
That's right. Thanks for mentioning that. You can listen to me on KLAY. That's Tacoma's conversation station. It's based in Lakewood, actually. It's a little AM station, 1180 on the AM dial, or you can actually go to clay1180.com, KLAY, and you can listen to me on the internet if you want to. It's Mondays right after the news from 12 to 1. Don't Let Money Ruin Your Life is the name of the show, so tune in.
Great, thank you. And thank you for sharing with us today and watching us, and stay tuned for our next presentation.